the free trade agreement of the Americas is very much a part of
One of the main reasons we want to preserve the status quo, of course, is so that we can buy and sell and make a profit and open up markets. And it makes sense that the FTAA would be going hand in hand with increased military assistance.
Our belief is that by linking Colombia with the other countries of the Andean region in a hemispheric approach that will reduce trade barriers and non-tariff obstacles to trade, Colombia, like the rest of the region, can in fact improve economically through trade.
The Free Trade Agreement of the Americas is the latest attempt by the U.S. government to eliminate trade barriers and labor and environmental regulations. The intent is to open wide and large the doors of Latin America to U.S. corporations and exports. Ever since the early days of the infamous United Fruit Company, U.S. military assistance has played a major part in consolidating dictatorships more friendly to U.S. corporations than to their own populations. Today, though, fruit is no longer the prime concern as the world's oil reserves are rapidly dwindling. While the U.S. wants to reserve its own oil in case of global conflict, it has also sought for many years to limit its dependency on faraway Middle Eastern oil. As a result, Venezuela has now become the second largest oil supplier to the U.S. But Colombia holds a similar promise, with the bonus of a friendlier regime to Washington, as long as the guerrilla does not prevail.
Over the past decade, Colombia went from producing 100,000 barrels of oil per day to now producing close to 900,000 barrels a day. Colombia is now the 7th largest provider of oil to the U.S. To give you an idea, Venezuela produces 1,600,000 barrels a day, Colombia 900,000, and nobody pays attention. And it is also a sweet deal for foreign companies because Colombia went from having a 50-50 profit sharing with these companies to offering now a 75% deal in favor of multinational corporations with only 25% in favor of the Colombian government.
So for companies like Occidental, which have significant oil interests in Colombia, they certainly view this as an extension of their interests, that if they could somehow pacify the guerrilla groups or transform them through the threat of warfare somehow into a less threatening political element, that therefore their ability to invest there and to make Colombia part of this sort of free market area of the Americas would be therefore much easier.
The fumigation is taking place primarily in guerrilla-held areas, even though the paramilitaries are as deeply, if not more deeply, involved in the drug trade. So that has led many of us to say that this policy has more to do with counterinsurgency than counter-narcotics.
So you see that as soon as the oil production increases in Colombia, so does the U.S. military presence, with $1.3 billion supposedly devoted to fighting drugs, when we are well aware that the focus of military intervention is precisely in areas with major oil interests.
It's because the energy resources of the world have to be under U.S. control. As far as Latin America, it's pretty much what George Kennan said 50 years ago. We have to protect our resources. Notice our resources. They happen to be in somebody else's country, but that's kind of accidental.
Many open or covert U.S. interventions abroad seem to have followed George Kennan's motto of protecting our resources. No means have been spared to secure territories and resources, even if it meant making deals with questionable allies. In Vietnam, when the French are defeated in 1954, the U.S. military intelligence keeps the French connection in place. a network by which anti-communist Hmong tribes were allowed to export their opium to Europe and then to the United States to fund their war against the Viet Minh.
Laos in the 1960s, the tribal warlords that were allied with the CIA opened a complex of 7 heroin refineries. They began exporting the heroin to South Vietnam, where a peak of 34% of all U.S. combat forces fighting in South Vietnam in 1971 were regular heroin users, according to a White House survey.
The same phenomenon re-emerged in Afghanistan in 1980 when the CIA enlists the help of Pakistani and Afghan opium warlords against the Soviet invaders. The very same alliance is resurrected against the Taliban in 2001. Opium cultivation, eradicated by the Taliban as part of their proclaimed moral order, is reintroduced on a larger scale than before by the new U.S. allies, the Northern Alliance. Their heroin is now flooding Europe and the United States, while U.S. military aircraft fly daily over their gigantic poppy fields.